it should be overemphasized how hard it is to referee a match.
Keen eyesight, first-class physique, and a quick, decisive mind are necessary attributes of a good referee. And to make sure they're right on top of their job, the association makes them pass stringent tests.
Wait a minute, he's taking another card out for Beckham. It's a red card for David Beckham.
And the goal by Aston, and Leeds will go mad. And they've every right to go mad because everybody stopped with the linesman flag.
Jared, just well done. That was your 4,600th foul.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so just put it up on the screen here.
Do I raise the bat? 4,600. Now.
The nation holds its breath. Yes,
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Arbiter podcast, a new series looking at the history of football refereeing. My name's Chris Alvorson and I was a football referee between 1995 and 2012. For this episode we're going to look all the way back to the first ever FIFA World Cup, which was held in Uruguay in 1930, and the career of one of its central characters. Before we begin, we're currently in the process of setting up a website and Patreon account for the podcast, and we'll try to aim to get out episodes at least once every week or two. So if you can subscribe, hit like, or whatever the cool kids do nowadays, it'd be much appreciated to get word of this out there. Now, not only will we cover the older stuff, but we'll also look at the innovations in the game that make the sport what it is today, for better or worse. If you have any suggestions as to subjects you would like to see covered, the contact email address is in the show notes, which is info@thearbiterpodcast.com, and we can also be reached on our Twitter account, which is @arbiterpodcast. So without further ado, let's dive in. So, like so many innovations in world football back in the 1920s and 30s, the World Cup was conceived in France. The two champions of its formation were also French. Jules Rimet, who gave his name to the small trophy that is presented to each champion up until the 1974 tournament, and Henri Delaunay, who devised the idea of the European Championships, for which the trophy, given out even to this day, is named after. Rimet was president of the French Football Federation, the FFF, for 30 years from its beginnings in 1919, and was also president of FIFA from 1920 to 1954, an extraordinary length of service. So FIFA's inaugural meeting took place in 1904. Of course, it would be in Paris of all places, but with three major football associations not present. Those are the English, Scottish and Welsh FAs. Even back then, FIFA decided that they would be the sole organisers of a global tournament. However, this plan was not to be exercised for another 26 years. Fast forward to 1920, and at the Congress held in Antwerp in Belgium, the idea of the World Cup, which had been much debated up until this point, was accepted into principle, with initial plans discussed. 4 years later at the Paris Olympics, which back then was the only global international tournament for football held, albeit tied to the Olympic ideals of a strictly amateur tournament, in which no professional players could participate, FIFA met once again, discussing the proposals in more serious detail. In 1926, again at a FIFA Congress, Henri Delaunay said, "Today, international football can no longer be held within the confines of the Olympics, and many countries where professionalism is now recognised and organised cannot any longer be represented there by their best players." As a result of this, the British associations, which even before the First World War had only been represented by genuine amateur players, completely withdrew from FIFA over the question of the broken time payment. Now, a payment for broken time was a proposal put forward in another sport, rugby union, by clubs in Yorkshire that would allow players to receive up to 6 shillings when they missed work because of match commitments. This disagreement in rugby union led to a split in its member clubs, with the northern clubs breaking away to form their own governing body and ultimately their own version of the sport, which we see today is rugby league. As such, the Olympic ethos and rules of amateur-only players were excluding such rising international stars of the game such as Austria and Hungary, while many of those who competed were professionals in all but name. Come 1928 in Amsterdam, where Uruguay retained the Olympic title against a strong challenge from Argentina, Delaunay's proposal that the World Cup be held as soon as possible was finally adopted. The next question was, so, who should host that first tournament? So, 5 countries expressed an interest originally: Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, and Uruguay. The Uruguayans, with a previous pedigree of Olympic champions, fought strongly for the right to host the tournament. Other countries have the history. Their team manager Vieira would say at the '66 tournament. Uruguay has its football. As part of this bid, they made an offer that they would pay all travelling and hotel expenses for all of the visiting teams, and they would build a new stadium for the tournament, an offer extraordinary for a country of only 2 million people. The new stadium would be sited in the centre of the capital city of Montevideo and would be called the Centenary Stadium, due to the fact that Uruguay would be celebrating 100 years of independence in 1930. Staggeringly, it would be built in only 8 months, with 3 of those months being in the inclement rainy season. Indeed, the offer worked, and Uruguay were awarded the rights to host the first ever FIFA World Cup at the 1929 Congress in Barcelona. However, this gave the Uruguayans just 2 months to find enough teams prepared to participate. The main issue was that no European associations had expressed an interest in taking the 2-week sea voyage to Montevideo. In addition to Italy, Spain, Sweden and the Netherlands, the Austrians, Hungarians, Germans, Swiss and Czechs all said no. England, Scotland and Wales, as mentioned previously, by this time had withdrawn completely from FIFA. Belgium, Romania and Yugoslavia were still non-committal, disappointingly, as were France, though after Rimé's appointment to the FIFA presidency and Uruguay's 1924 appearance at the Paris Olympics, the case for them to swallow their pride and go was strong. The reluctance to travel was seen as an affront to the membership of FIFA and a consequent awarding of the tournament to one of their fellow South American members. So all of the Latin American federations threatened to withdraw from FIFA, a threat that was much to be repeated several times in the future years. Finally, Belgium and Romania succumbed to great pressure and confirmed they would now attend. The Belgians, as a result of the representations of the veteran FIFA Vice President Rodolphe Sildres, and Romania under that of their king, King Carol himself. Although Carol was never a popular king in Romania, he had a major passion and a great involvement in all things sport in his country. One of his first acts after coming to the throne was to grant an amnesty to all suspended Romanian footballers. It is also said that he himself picked the squad and pressured the companies which employed them to give them time off to travel to Uruguay for the glory of their nation. Finally, Yugoslavia agreed to make the trip, so there would finally be 4 European entrants, but this was some desired way away from having the elite of the European game participate, a fact that scarcely placated the affront felt by the Uruguayan FA. Alongside the 4 Europeans, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Paraguay, Peru, the United States and the hosts Uruguay made up the final 13 teams that would compete for the inaugural FIFA World Cup. As for the referees, for the first time in history, an official had the chance to really shine outside of his own nation on a truly global stage. However, most referees were not really highly regarded in FIFA circles to begin with. No uniform standards were actually in place to guarantee the top referees would be in attendance in Uruguay. Indeed, due to the British nations withdrawing from FIFA, it was not until 1950 that any British representation in black was seen at the World Cup. In the end, there were 11 referees selected for the first tournament, 1 from France, 2 from Belgium, 1 Brazilian, 1 Argentine, a Bolivian, a Chilean, and 4 from Uruguay. One of the Belgians was a referee by the name of John Langenus. John Langenus was born into a very wealthy Antwerp family on December the 8th, 1891. After a very unremarkable childhood, he became a full-time civil servant within the office of the governor of the province of Antwerp. He did play football in his youth, but a foot injury in the school's competition known as the Cardinal Cup ended his playing career. It was after this that he looked at other avenues to remain involved in the game. Back then, the Belgian FA was in need of referees in the early days of its history, and Langenus applied to become an official. However, he actually failed his first attempt at qualifying as a referee. In the final exam, the instructors, who were 2 Englishmen, asked him questions as difficult as they were surprising. The 2 questions he failed the examination on were: what should the referee do if the ball, whilst in the air, is caught and stolen by the pilot of a plane passing overhead? And what should the referee do if the goalkeeper decides to sit on the crossbar and refuses to leave that position? However, given the lack of qualified referees in Belgium at the time, Langenus was summoned again to appear before the referee committee 3 months later, and then passed his second attempt at the examination, in which more serious questions were asked. Once qualified, Langenus begins his career, as we all do, controlling matches at youth level. One story that Langenus recalls is that his first whistle was purchased for 30 Belgian centimes, which he notes was the only whistle he ever bought in his entire career. When he lost that whistle, a local painting company stepped in and provided him with a replacement as part of a sponsorship deal. This whistle he would keep until the end of his career, and this was also the whistle that he used to referee the final of the 1930 World Cup in Uruguay. In one of his first schools games, the president of one of the 2 clubs, unhappy with the game ending as a draw, burst into the change rooms at the end of the match and promised to break Langenus' legs if he ever refereed them again. At this time, Langenus regularly controlled up to 3 matches every Sunday, often travelling by foot due to the lack of public transport. He said that he considered the Sunday afternoon matches to be important because by participating as a linesman, now called assistant referees, he had contact with more experienced referees from which to learn. In time, Langenus successfully passed the theory test to upgrade to become a first division referee, the highest level in Belgium. One of the first fixtures he refereed at that level was between 2 reserve teams of Standard Liège and Beerschot AC. Back then, the first team's match must take place at the same time in the main stadium, but the referee on this day is absent. They offer Langenus a chance to referee the first team match, but he wisely refuses, telling the club that he is not feeling strong enough for that yet. His second match in the top division in the 1912-13 season, however, proved to be a traumatic one for him. The initially appointed referee for the fixture between FC Liégeois and Daring does not travel to Liège due to threats against him as a result from a previous game. Langenus is therefore given a fixture to replace him at very, very short notice, but the crowd is unaware that there has been a change of referee. and thinking there has actually been no change whatsoever, abused Langenus mercilessly the entire game. He is even forced to dispose with the services of one of his own linesmen for the same type of behaviour. The match ends with Liège being on the wrong end of a 6-0 defeat, which results in the crowd behaviour becoming much, much worse. After the game, a pitch invasion ensues, and Langenus receives a punch in the stomach from a spectator. As a result of this, he is given a police escort from the stadium to the local station in Gilmeens. According to reports, along the way he is threatened by 100 or so people, some of whom even throw bricks at him from a house nearby that was under construction. Once he arrives at the police station, the President of Liège gives him the advice: when you do not know your job, it is better not to be a referee. Langenus, however, decides to disregard this advice and continues to officiate. A few weeks later, he learns what he has called his big lesson. The story is not lacking in comedy, however. He's appointed as referee of the match between the two leaders in the First Division Championship, Racing de Bruxelles and FC Brugeois, who later on became Club Bruges. Langenus decides he will officiate the game wearing 2 watches, one on each wrist. However, before the game, one of the coaches of Racing Bruxelles, the Englishman Charles Bunyan, who later became the national team manager for Belgium, approaches the referee and states he has received a new model of stopwatch from England, and he wishes the referee to experiment with using it during the game. Armed with this stopwatch, Langenus can therefore safely rely on 3 devices to check the time. However, during the first half, he realises that the hands of one of the wristwatches isn't moving. It then dawns on him that he forgot to wind it up before the game. To compound matters even more, he also forgot to look at the time at the start of the game due to being distracted by this new stopwatch he's been given. In short, Langenus, in the absence of a clock in the stadium, has no idea how much time has actually passed during the game. He therefore decides to estimate the length of the first half, but manages to get away with this due to the confidence he controls the game and blowing for half-time with such authority that no one dared dispute he was wrong. Standing at 1.90 m, he was a tall figure that commanded respect from all. Recalling the incident later, he said that it takes daring and mastery, even in the most difficult circumstances, to become a referee. In 1920, John Langenus starts to officiate internationally, with his first fixture being an Armed Forces International between France and England in Paris. More appointments followed, with his ability to speak several languages as a result of his job counting in his favour. And in 1924, he is officially appointed to the FIFA referee list. His first FIFA international came in September 1924, with him controlling Sweden's 6-1 win over Norway in front of 8,000 spectators at the old Resunda Stadium in Stockholm. At the beginning of 1927, he became the first referee on the continent to officiate in the newly independent Ireland for the Ireland-Italy game at Lansdowne Road in Dublin. Reports from the day state that Langenus' handling of the game was just as good as anyone in England. High praise indeed. He took part in his first major tournament in 1928, namely the Olympic Games in Amsterdam. There he was entrusted with a bronze medal game as Italy beat Egypt 11-3. He was also appointed as one of the linesmen to the Dutch referee Johannes Mutters in a final between Uruguay and Argentina, which went to a replay, resulting in Uruguay beating Argentina 2-1 with a Hector Scarona goal 17 minutes from time. Then we come to the 1930 World Cup itself. Langenus served as a referee on 4 games and ran the line on another 2. Before we come to the story of his tournament, I wanted to touch on an incident that occurred in another one of the games in the finals, the Group 3 fixture on July the 14th, 1930, between Romania and Peru, in which the Europeans won 3-1. The Chilean referee Arbiter had controlled the match in a manner of what could only be described as a rabbit in the headlights, giving random free kicks whilst ignoring the fact that he could sanction players for the more brutal acts of aggression on the field. The main culprit of this was the Peruvian captain, Mario de las Casas, who played his football at club level for the marvellously named Lawn Tennis de la Exposición, who are still going today, albeit in the regional leagues in Peru. Eventually, as a result of a challenge on the Romanian right-back Adalbert Steiner, which saw the Chinazul Timișoara player sustain a broken leg, Wanken finally decided enough was enough, and promptly sent off the wrong Peruvian. De las Casas, who for a change was nowhere near the incident, was ordered off by the Chilean official, despite his vehement protestations, becoming the first player ever to be sent off in the World Cup finals. The main fact here was that none of the players had numbers on the backs of their shirts, thereby making identification nigh on impossible in situations such as this. Despite major representations to change this part of the game, shirt numbers were actually not introduced by FIFA as mandatory until 1939. Anyway, back to Langenus. He was one of the 3 European referees who travelled over for the finals, with the other 2 referees being the Belgian Henri Christophe and Thomas Balvet from France. The 3 officials travelled on the Conte Verde from Villefranche-sur-Mer, which is located a little east of Nice, on June the 21st, 1930. On the same ship were Jules Rimet, the trophy itself, and football representatives from France, Romania and Belgium. On board the ship was also Costel Radulescu, Romania's coach, who was also a linesman in 2 matches in which Romania did not play. Indeed, the inclusion of Langenus on the panel was down to happy circumstance. Henri Christophe was also present, and if Belgium had only been told to take 1 referee, it was only Christophe who would have gone to Uruguay, explains Stefan van der Leeuw, a Belgian journalist and press officer for the Belgian national team, who wrote Back to Montevideo, a book on the Belgian participation in the 1930 finals. But Langenus had an aura and personality that spoke for him. He had officiated during the Olympic Games of 28, directing the bronze medal game. His tall stature, he was almost 2 metres in height, and his appearance made him a star of European refereeing at the time. The Frank de Blaker of the 1930s, Van Leeuw said. His first 2 games in the finals passed off without major incident, with Uruguay versus Peru on July the 18th and Argentina versus Chile on July the 22nd, both in the group stages. The 3rd game he was entrusted with was the semi-final between Argentina and the United States, which the Argentines won 6-1, in which a truly bizarre incident occurred. The Americans had not been happy with this handling of the game so far, largely due to the rough methods of the Argentines. As a result, several players of the American team were injured, and reports say that by the end of the match it is reported that they had only 6 healthy players remaining on the field. Langenus blew for a foul on an Argentine player, as a result of which one of the American medical staff, one John Call, ran onto the field to remonstrate with the referee. He threw his bag of medical equipment to the floor in front of Langenus, but inadvertently smashed a bottle of chloroform in the process. As a result, chloroform does what chloroform will, and the American swiftly collapsed on the ground as a result of the fumes, in the end having to be stretchered off by his teammates. The news of the appointment for the final came as a complete and utter surprise to Langenus, as he actually intended to return to Europe shortly after the semi-final. Being invited to a meeting with the governor of Montevideo, that's where he learnt of the news. Langenus was therefore forced to postpone his departure. So moving on to the day of the final itself, the heat and pressure before the final was so great that the Belgian referee agreed only to take the appointment just 2 hours before kick-off, after the organisers agreed to his demands of being provided with life insurance to the tune of $10,000 in case of injury or death, and a guaranteed departure from Montevideo for him and his two linesmen, Henri Christophe of Belgium and Ulysses Salcedo of Bolivia, within an hour after the end of the game. He also insisted on the 60,000 spectators to be searched for weapons on entry to the stadium. As a result of this, a total of 1,600 pistols were actually confiscated on the gate. Before the start of the final match at the entrance to the stadium, Langenus, who actually turned up to the game in his full kit due to the construction of the change rooms at the Estadio Centenario having not been finished, was mistakenly detained by police along with 20 fans who had actually tried to gain admission with false referee identity passes. Soon after proving who he was released and taken into the stadium via a police escort. Now onto the game itself. Before kick-off, each team wanted to use only their own match ball. Therefore, the Solomonic decision was made with the toss of a coin. An Argentine ball would be used in the first half, a Uruguayan one in the second half. Now he took the field in a rather striking uniform back then. A dinner jacket, a red striped tie, and a pair of +4s, which are akin to the old style of golfing trousers. It actually wasn't until the 1950 tournament that officials wore a standardised uniform of black socks, long black shorts, a white shirt, and a black blazer with a FIFA badge embroidered onto it. Indeed, black wasn't chosen as a standard colour of the kit due to its neutral colour qualities, but actually as a result of the huge amount of surplus black material left over after World War II. Photographs of the 1930 tournament show a myriad of styles of kit, with the Bolivian officials sporting a dark blazer and white trousers, the Europeans going for an all-dark kit more common to what we see today, and a couple of the Uruguayan referees wearing what looked to be multicoloured pinstripe jackets. Unfortunately, due to there being no colour photography at the time, this is only speculation as to what those colours could be. A fair proportion of officials also took the field in flat caps to control games. So back to the final itself, and I will quote from the excellent reference source of The Story of the World Cup by Brian Glanville. Though Uruguay clearly had to be favoured on their own stadium, before their own crowd, the team had not played with the assurance of its predecessors. Moreover, Pellegrin Anselmo was unfit and was replaced at centre forward by Castro. Petroni's sun had definitely set. Argentina might have missed Orsi, but they found Stabile, and their forward play had been excellent, full of fast, sweeping, intelligent movements. The traditionally fine ball control allied to subtle positioning. In goal, however, there was a manifest weakness. Angelo Bossio's flashy, unreliable play had led to him being dropped from the semi-final, but his replacement, Juan Botasso, was no great improvement. The first half was pregnant with surprises. After only 12 minutes, Pablo Dorado, the Uruguayan right winger, gave his country the lead, but Pusali, his opposite number, equalised. And 10 minutes from half-time, Langenus boldly sanctioned a goal by Stabile, which Nasazi, Uruguay's captain, fiercely insisted was offside. Crowds being unpredictable organisms, there was no attempt to invade the pitch this time, merely a stunned acceptance. The crowds came to life again 10 minutes after the interval, when Pedro Saya capped an insidious dribble with equalising goal. Uruguay had broken the spell. 10 minutes more, and the young Uruguayan exile left Santos Iriarte put them ahead. And finally Castro and Salmo's understudy smashed the ball into the roof of the net in the concluding seconds. Uruguay had won an exciting and surprisingly good-tempered game 4-2. After the conclusion of the final, due to once again the lack of public transport which blighted the start of his career, Langenus had to walk back the 45 minutes to his hotel, through the streets of the capital, wearing his boots and full kit. It was reported that the Argentine fans, annoyed at the defeat the team had suffered after the match, stoned the windows of the hotel, but his room is upstairs, so he and his property were not affected. He will go down in football history and remains the only Belgian referee to lead a World Cup final, no doubt for a long time to come. After this, Langenus officiated at another 2 World Cup finals. At the 1934 edition in Italy, he refereed only 1 game, in which the Czechoslovakians defeated Romania 2-1 in the round of 16 in Trieste. The decisive goal from Nedji that turned out to be controversial, with Langenus missing a possible offence in the build-up to the winner due to being flat on his back on the ground after colliding with another player. Langenus later described the tournament as the greatest sports fiasco of all time, with allegations of match fixing by the Italian organisers, which will be featured in a future episode. In France at the 38 finals, he refereed the opening game between Germany and Switzerland, sending off the German Hans Pesser in extra time. As the game finished in a 1-1 draw, it went to a replay which Langenus was not appointed to. His last World Cup game was a 3rd-4th playoff between Brazil and Sweden in Bordeaux, in which the Brazilians won 4-2. Away from the World Cup, Langenus officiated some notable international fixtures. In December 1932, he was the referee of the match between England and the Austrian Wonder Team in London, which England won 4-3, and about which Langenus would later say, "I experienced the best game of my career at Stamford Bridge. I still have many situations I can remember even today, as if the game had just happened yesterday." He also refereed the Austrians' 2-2 draw against Scotland in Glasgow in 1933, as the Austrians became the first team from the continent to avoid defeat in an international match in Scotland. Such was his standing, Langenus also refereed the 1927-28 Republic of Ireland Senior Cup final in Dublin, becoming one of the first non-Irish referees to take such a fixture, where Bohemians beat Drumcondra 2-1 at Dalymount Park in front of a crowd of 25,000. Finally, he refereed 10 England international fixtures between 1928 and 1939, most notably the 6-3 win in Berlin in May 1938, where the England team were famously pictured giving the Nazi salute before the game. Sir Neville Henderson, the British ambassador in Germany, had advised the team, through the FA secretary Stanley Rose, who became president of FIFA in later years, to give the Nazi salute for the betterment of Anglo-German relations, as a mark of respect and not nationalism. The Germans had already decided to respect the English national anthem. The fixture itself was watched by Nazi luminaries such as Goering, Rudolf Hess and Joseph Goebbels. Hitler, up until the day before the game, was due to be in attendance, but in the end he did not turn up on the day. Langenus officiated his last international game in June 1939, ending up on a total of 64 international appointments. In the Belgian League, he was active until 1944. In his later years after retirement, he worked as a journalist, sometimes even as a reporter for games he actually refereed himself, and wrote 3 books, an autobiography called Whistling in the World, and 2 other football-related works of non-fiction. John Langenus died at the age of 60 on October 1st, 1952, in his hometown of Antwerp in Belgium, 8 years after his retirement as a football referee. So that was the story of one of the first refereeing superstars in the game's history. Thank you for listening to this first episode of the series. We should be back in the next week or so with our next edition. Once again, if you have any suggestions as to subjects we'd like to see covered, the contact email address is in the show notes, which is info@thearbiterpodcast.com, and we can also be reached on our Twitter account @arbiterpodcast. Until next time, my name is Christopher Vorson, and thank you for listening.
It should be overemphasized how hard it is to referee a match.
Keen eyesight, first-class physique, and a quick, decisive mind are necessary attributes of a good referee. And to make sure they're right on top of their job, the association makes them pass stringent tests.
Wait a minute, he's taking another card out for Beckham. It's a red card for David Beckham.
And the goal by Aston, and Leeds will go
Jared, just well done. That was your 4,600th foul.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so just put it up on the screen here.
Do I raise the bat? 4,600. Ow.
The nation holds its breath. Yes, we're there!